Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great day so far. I'm Cherie Burton, and this is Women Seeking Wholeness, episode 190. We are inching super close to my 200th episode, in which I will reveal the new name of the podcast, which happens to coincide with the very last Wednesday of the year, December 28th, 2022. I'm so excited for the new direction I'm heading, more intentionality around the tougher issues we're facing and going deeper with what really matters. A lot of you guys are in transition, and I want to speak to that. I want to speak to stepping into higher consciousness and all of the interesting twists and turns around awakening, releasing trauma and things of that nature, so that you can unearth who you actually are, because we are in a journey of remembering here on this earth. That's what we're doing. This episode is about honoring your cycle. What makes the feminine cycle so powerful? Periods of rest and productivity. Why tracking your cycles is so important. And this beautiful, quiet revolution currently happening with women, sometimes not so quiet, in the context of what we're going to talk about in this episode. A quiet revolution of women landing back into their bodies, getting back in touch with their bodies, full embodiment. And this is Lisa Jara. She's a menstrual wisdom specialist and soul-based coach, supporting women moving through challenging life transitions, including miscarriage, menopause, and psycho-emotional crises. Been there, done that, all of those. She leads women to body connectivity, trauma release, and going powerfully within. Lisa comes to us from Germany. No matter where you're at in your hormone cycle, in my case, I'm menopausal, it really doesn't matter, because how we're built is through spirals and cycles. And this is how we create. This is how we get to the heart of things. This is how we align. So hope you really love this discussion, and remember to follow us on Instagram, cherie.burton, as well as ask to join our private Facebook group, Women Seeking Wholeness. So Lisa, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. When I saw that you're a menstrual wisdom specialist, I'm like, I've never even heard of that. Can you speak to that? Just what that is for you and how it showed up for you?
It's kind of, I don't know if that even is a thing, but I called it that because menstrual health sounded so clinical, and I'm a very spiritually inclined person. And for me, what menstruation, and not only menstruation, but the whole menstrual cycle and the menstrual journey teaches us is so much about our emotional, mental, and spiritual selves, as well as our physical selves. That there is so much wisdom attached if we dare to listen and to lean into every phase, that I want to bring that into the world, that women, and it doesn't matter if you're still menstruating, or if you've crossed over into menopause, or if you're on some point of the journey, maybe not having a uterus anymore, but this wisdom still lives in our bones. It still lives within us. And from all the clients that I've seen and worked with, like, even when they haven't started on this whole journey of looking into what else the menstrual cycle has to offer, they intuitively tell me things that I have read in the books, but they haven't. And
they're just intuiting it.
They just know.
You just know that, and that phrase right there. Sometimes you just know. Is it supersedes like factual science and linear thinking and the logic brain. And so when you say that to somebody who's really stuck in like the third dimensional way of seeing things, like the material plane, it's really hard for them to trust that embodied wisdom. I mean, it's hard for people to receive that sometimes who aren't playing in that space. You know what I mean? Like just the average person, when you say, I know, well, how do you know? So I love that you're tying it into cycles. I know you live in Germany. You're in a different cycle than me right now, because it's evening for you and it's like afternoon early afternoon for me. I'm curious how this became something that you were super dialed in on. Like, I want to do this. I want to speak about menstruation and women's cycles. And and embodied wisdom. How did that come to be for you?
It probably started 5 years ago, roughly 2017. I hit I think the lowest point I've ever hit in my life. I have a history of anorexia and obsessive compulsive disorder since I was 13. In various degrees, on and off, but it definitely was, there was a red thread. And at that point, I had taken on my first job and had worked there for a few years. But it was really hard for me to keep up with all the rules I thought I had to obey, all the expectations that either were there or that I thought were there. Certainly my own expectations. And so I set more and more rules, and the leeway I had became smaller and smaller until I looked at my life one day and I was like, do I want that for another 40 years? And I was like, hell no. Yeah, and so I started this journey it started with going to a mental health clinic where, while getting in touch with my own emotions, I discovered that I just love holding space for other people and their journeys and their emotions, and that I am apparently quite good at that because I'm not afraid of intense emotions.
Because you've experienced it in your body. And isn't that part of wisdom? Like, you have to earn it. You have to earn the wisdom.
Yeah, it's like knowledge and experience. That's what wisdom is. And yes, that's partly true. And I'm a Scorpio. And if you know anything about Scorpios, we like to go deep and we are intense.
Yes, my dad's a Scorpio. I kind of collect Libra and Scorpio males in my life. Like, two of my sons are Libras. One's a Libra Scorpio cusp, and my dad's a Scorpio. My brothers are Libras, and they're all October babies. Are you an October baby?
No, November.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, I get it. And on the Ayurvedic astrology chart, I'm actually a Scorpio moon, or Scorpio ascendant. I mean, so I'm with you. You have to dive deep with that intensity. Yes. And sometimes it's like, I want this body, like your soul's like, I'll take that body, I'll take this lineage, I'll live it and experience it and transmute it. And then I'll just start teaching it. I'll just start helping people, like applied knowledge, really, with that wisdom. I think wisdom isn't I was just going to say, I think wisdom, like, I love that you put knowledge and experience together with wisdom. And then I would even add to that wisdom is applied knowledge, because when you embody actual wisdom earned through experience and the accumulation of knowledge, then you, just by your presence, you emit a frequency that actually is very healing for people, so that when you say, I know, they're listening. Right. Their ears perk up because they feel that frequency that you're emitting. It creates, like you said, you can hold space, and holding space is creating that safety without saying much of anything. It's just, I'm here. I'm with you. I have felt this.
Yeah. It's something I call quiet power. It's this thing you feel reverberating through your bones. And that has this natural authority in a positive way. Like this, hey, I know we are all humans. And yes, life can feel like shit sometimes. Yeah. And it was right there in that moment in that clinic that I came across a book, which is called Goddess Wisdom. And it talked about the cycles and how the structures that we live in and the systems that we live in have disconnected us, or are doing their best to disconnect us from our bodies, from our wisdom, from our power. Yeah. And so that set me up on this whole journey of, what do the cycles have to offer? And that helped me enormously make peace with my anorexia and with my body. And like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for that book.
It's called Goddess Wisdom.
Goddess Wisdom by Tanishka, the Moon Woman. Okay. I've done a few of her courses since, and it's really, it helped me spiral, like consciously walk the spiral within of meeting the deep, dark, and separated goddess aspects of myself.
Yes. And that's so liberating and scary to, and people don't realize when they think about the path of the goddess or embodying goddess wisdom or the dark feminine, it's like they don't, I mean, the feminine in general, they don't actually understand the depth that you're going to with that meeting of the goddess, because she is in the dark. She is seeding the universe, and it's womb, and it's womb wisdom. It's mystery. And I love that you talked about a spiral. That descent journey is where you meet the god. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey or the Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch? They talk about.
I haven't read them, but I'm familiar with the concept. Yes.
So meeting with the goddess is one of them, but you can't meet with the goddess until you go through the descent journey. And it's the masculine is outside of us. The feminine is inside us. So it's a descent journey into yourself. Like you said, the confrontation of your shadows. So I want you to go back to what you're talking about with the moons. This is something I share in my Stand, Speak, Shine course, that everything, like you kind of have to work with the cycles of the moon. So you talk about there's a dark half of the cycle that's heavily overlooked and underrated that has created depression, anxiety, and et cetera. Can you kind of speak to that piece about the moon and the link to depression, anxiety?
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at a cycle, and it doesn't matter if it's the menstrual cycle or the moon cycle or the year cycle or even the bigger cycles of life, there are usually the 4 big phases of menstruation, dark moon, winter, the crone phase, so to speak, in a woman's life. And then, of course, spring, summer, autumn, or waxing moon, full moon, waning moon, etc. And when I talk of the dark half, I mean the autumn phase and the winter phase, or the premenstrual and menstrual phase, or the waning moon and dark moon phase. And in order for a cycle to be regenerative, we need all 4 phases. But in the societies we live in, we are mostly encouraged to be in spring and summer and to look like we're in spring and summer. And that's why
which is more of the like maiden. You talk about the crone. What is it? The spring and the
maiden and the mother or parenthood phase. And that's regardless of whether mothering a child or a project or a business or whatever your project is. But to always show up, to have lots of ideas, to be outwards, and not show and move through the difficult feelings, the dark emotions, the intense emotions. I don't like to speak of positive and negative emotions because there are no negative emotions. There are just some that are more difficult to deal with. Because again, in this society where we are very anti all of these dark things, we haven't learned how to be with them. I believe that in a different time, we learned that also through the practice of the red tent. If you're familiar with that.
The red tent. Yes. I heard you say red thread. I'm like, oh, she's speaking my language earlier. But yeah, share that with our listeners, because that's a super powerful metaphorical and historical thing. The red tent.
Yeah, the red tent was the place where women and bleeding people gathered while they were bleeding. And you were allowed to enter that as soon as you had received your first bleed, menarche. And then you would have like this beautiful ceremony where you were welcomed into this red tent, and where you would from then on meet all the women of the tribe or of the community every month, basically. Well, depending on when you bleed, of course, but and through this being together, like at all ages, young women would already understand what it means to go through, to be in marriage, to go through pregnancy, to experience childbirth and all of that. And you would witness each other and hold each other in these dark phases. So that is really a powerful practice that I think has been lost. And I even read that in the Native American traditions, women were sleeping with their heads towards the center of the tent. And the next morning, they would have to report their dreams to the chieftain or the medicine man I'm not sure, but and while one dream may not have made much sense, from all the dreams collected and placed together, they could derive where to go next with their tribe for like hunting grounds and all of that.
Wow.
And that's why our menstrual cycle, or the moon cycle, if we've crossed over, is so powerful and holds so much wisdom if we dare to not just track when do we bleed, but track what kind of dreams do I have? What's my emotional state right now? When are the days that are difficult emotionally? Yeah.
So you're saying that you have more heightened sensitivity, or like to your spiritual gifts or some psychic abilities during those times?
Definitely.
And the dream space?
And I do know many women who experience that simply during dark moon. And so for me, it's always like taking the personal cycle first. So I still menstruate. So for me, that's my baseline cycle. And then the others for me are flavors. So the moon still influences me. And imagine menstruation during dark moon in winter, because I bleed with the moon. That's like an extra low point.
Yeah. Like you can literally look at periods of your entire life and go, oh, that's when I was in that. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's really so much power and wisdom in the blood.
And it's so interesting how I think you even used the word women's power has been demonized, like our menstruation and our sexuality. So we don't know how to hold it. And yes. I don't know how it is in Europe. It feels like you guys are a little freer. I don't know, like maybe you see Americans a little more free. You're in Germany, so it may, depending on what your culture and where you live, I know every place is different, but it seems like there's a little bit more body shaming here in the US. But tell me, educate me, because I don't know. I know there's a lot of deep roots in Christianity and Catholicism and whatnot, like in Europe. And we have that here too. But sometimes traditions of the fathers can get intermixed with that whole shaming thing and the patriarchy. Are you finding that influence where you are much? I'm assuming so.
Well, it of course also depends on what kind of family you grew up in. Like my grandmother used Christian religion to manipulate people and have people do what she wanted them to do. So she was big on the sin and shaming thing. And I have, even though I have my relationship with Christianity and I'm making peace with that by now, and I did not have an overly religious mother, but still all of these things were so present when I was little that I was very much influenced by that. Plus, I do believe that we also have a lot of body shaming and stuff going around here.
Okay.
Girls at, 9, they are talking about dieting here too. So where does that come from? And as I shared earlier, we do have so much power, but if we knew how to wield it wisely,
right.
There would be things, they would be very different all across the world. And so I get why they try to separate us from it, and it's working well.
Well, to this point, it's worked well until now. And I think there's this whole awakening, right? Around people like you coming up with these new niches into feminine empowerment. And it's like you were saying, it's the quiet path. It's the gentle way. That's the way we're going to make this revolutionary change, is just to embody our own wisdom, just to live from that space of, I know this doesn't feel right to my body, and therefore I know, right? And just living from that. I think there will be enough of a groundswell when enough males and females, or non-binary, whoever, whatever the feminine energy that you embody, when you let that, really live in you unapologetically, I think everything is going to change. And
yeah, absolutely. and also the demonizing of our sexuality it runs so deep. And it influences men or male people as well, right? It's not just about, as you say, it's about the feminine energy when you've got the yin and the yang, which are for us probably more neutral terms. And I just read an article the other day about sex toys and men, and how we view men who use masturbators as somehow, oh, he didn't get a woman, what's wrong with him? Mm-hmm. But we women use that too for a man's pleasure sometimes, because they enjoy looking at it.
Interesting.
And watching us, and reading that article, I was like, wow, I do have some work to do within myself, because I recognize that me too, I had this stigma around men and sex toys, but why should that be? And so even men would be very much liberated, were we liberated from all of that.
Yeah. And I think at its core, it's just the shame. It's just underneath it is just fear. And if we just really unpacked it, like, what is the fear? Like, if we destigmatize human sexuality and let people be in their bodies and let's just say judge their own readiness or their own thing or their own identity, their own sexual identity, like, what is the fear? You talked about your grandmother having this, Christian really manipulation. I think a lot of religious communities have the tendency to want to own your sexuality, or it's like you don't really own your body because, there's just a lot of really interesting and sometimes overt, sometimes subtle messages around our sexuality that can be difficult to unpack. And I think that's why you have to have your own wisdom. Mm-hmm. Because there are so many cultural messages. There's religion, there's family, there's, social media. I mean, there's just, we're constantly being bombarded. And it just keeps triggering us. It just keeps triggering us until we really heal it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's why I am so on my way of the quiet revolution.
Yes. I was going to ask
support people.
Yes.
in doing just that.
So walk me through that practically when you say, it's this quiet revolution. Yet I see it as energetically very loud and passionate and strong. But I guess from the observation standpoint, maybe it's more quiet. So when you talk about a quiet revolution, what do you sort of see in your mind's eye? And practically, how do we forge that and unify?
I sometimes add quiet yet powerful revolution because it is indeed very powerful. I love this juxtaposition of quiet and revolution, which makes people go, huh? What's that about? And it's really, there is a lot of talk about smashing the patriarchy and go fight the patriarchy, etc. And I have worked in a feminist women's rights organization where we were all about smashing the patriarchy in other countries with our partner organizations, yet in our very organization, we had patriarchal structures in place. And so I asked myself, well, if we smash and manage to smash those structures, what would we have to put in place other than, again, patriarchal structures? So for me, that's why I said it's not important all the way to go out and want to smash the patriarchy, but I'm looking at myself and looking at, okay, where are these structures right in my body, in my way of thinking, in how I deal with my emotions, and starting to look at, okay, what's the wisdom here? What do I want to have happen with my life?
Right.
And so from that point on, it's more like an eroding the patriarchy. We draw back from the structures because we understand how they work, and we refuse to go along. And by turning within and eroding those structures, they will crumble because there's nothing that will uphold them anymore.
Right.
And at that point, we have something different in place because we've practiced that all along. And that's sustaining them and sustainable for afterwards.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we all have internalized patriarchy. So while we might be saying, okay, so a lot of times we get triggered by false authority that tries to take away our sovereignty or our freedom. And the reason that we're so triggered is we haven't dealt with that in ourselves because we have internalized patriarchy and sometimes we're afraid of our own power. I'm speaking about myself right now. I had to unpack that. And yet it is gentle. It is non-confrontational. It's more invitational to, like you said, or I like how you talked about eroding the structure and just disengaging. Sometimes that speaks more loudly than like holding up a picket sign and trying to come to the table and like have a debate, if you will, or, you know, because revolutions don't stick, or like you said, they're not sustainable if it's not internalized. If we haven't learned how to internalize these things, and we're just like, that's all the divisiveness happening right now in the world is about that. It's about this confrontation. And I'm like, why don't our political leaders know that what you're talking about, right? That's more sustainable.
And you know what? The word where the word revolution comes from, it comes from revolving. So again, the cyclical stuff.
Here we are back to that.
And that's exactly. And that's why, like for me, cycle awareness, meaning like all cycles, also those outside the bigger cycles of life and such, that's a feminist practice. It's a decolonization practice. It's an anti-patriarchal practice because it's about listening to our own rhythm and our own wisdom and living at a pace that suits us instead of living at a pace that's set by society.
Yes.
And so we revolve around ourselves because that's what living in tune with our cycle ultimately does. It brings us home to ourselves. Because in the center, like life is a spiral. We go around the spirals all the time and we move closer and closer to ourselves. And in these dark moments of menstruation or dark moon, that is when we are closest to our true essence, to who we really are. And so each month we are reminded, oh, that's who I am. And then we go back out in the world and we forget a little bit. And then we come back in the next menstruation, but always a little bit closer.
Yeah, I love it. And then just also being gentle with ourselves and being, like you said, like it's not so much. I think the old models and the old structures were all about what's measurable in the physical realm and more of that linear path. And what you're talking about is the cycle of creation, and everything's round, everything's in cycles. The moon's round, the earth's round, everything is cyclical. And that is where we're at. We're on this continuum of a circle, of a cycle. And it just keeps, I love, what did you say the root word of revolution was? Revolve?
From revolving. Yeah. Revolving around the center.
Yeah. Like that's how our whole, galaxy is set up, really. And I love it. So in your work with women, specifically when you're trying to help them embody this wisdom and to tune in, what are just a few ways, or maybe just your top even way that you like to give to them as a practice that they can, tangibly do or work through to be able to get to a space where they're kind of in that quiet knowing?
Yeah. One thing I want to say, I work with soul-based coaching, which is a process of questions that leads us into metaphor. And that brings out your individual metaphors, and metaphors are our soul's language, and also the way we see, like the lens we see the world through. So if you've learned in your childhood that it's good to have a wall around your heart because otherwise you get hurt, that's a good thing in your childhood maybe, but the wall is still there when you're 35 and in a relationship, and then the wall is maybe not as handy as practical.
It's not serving the greatest purpose anymore.
Exactly. And so we often look at, okay, when there is this wall, what would you like to have happen? Like, this is always I think it's the most important question that we need to ask ourselves. What would I like to have happen? Because what happens for most people, myself included, I don't know. I know what I don't want.
Yeah. Right.
And I believe part of that is because we've rarely been asked what we wanted. We are more often told what we are supposed to do. And in case we were asked, the answer was often, yeah, you can't have that. That's impossible, etc., etc. And so we just trust what we want, the thing we want. We trust that we believe we can't have it. And so starting with imagining what that you want to have happen, what that would be like, feeling it, smelling, tasting it, smelling it.
Just letting it kind of live in through your senses and filtering it through, like making it more alive in you.
Yeah. And does it have a shape or a size? Is it inside of you or outside of you? It could be anywhere. I trust your metaphors. And then trusting that alone can set things in motion for your system to align with that vision. And I don't even like to say visualize, because it's visceral. It's like really being there. Even though your current reality probably doesn't look anything like it, that's okay. But from that place, if you have felt that once, your system knows what it's looking for, and it can start bringing people into your life. I believe that once we have our system on board, things will happen. The universe will make it happen, will send us the right people, or let us come across the right courses or books or whatever. Similar to me coming across that book of the Goddess Wisdom. Yeah,
you definitely attracted that.
I started to be open to something different. Yeah.
Yes.
And another thing is definitely looking at your life and appreciating what you already have. I know it has become kind of a cliche, this gratitude thing, but it's so true.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's like, isn't it like the highest calibrated emotional state is gratitude? And it's when you're triggered, it's the one you want to resist the most. It's the one that we purposely like route our brains away from, the neural networking, because on some level we want to stay in the lower vibration, and there's a part of us that knows that if we go to gratitude, that will change our vibration, and we just sometimes don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, partly that, and due to the way the world is set up, we prefer analyzing the problem, because we've learned, if there's a problem, you have to look at it exactly and analyze it and think of ways to overcome it, instead of, okay, let's take that whole thing away for a moment and let's see, what would you like to have happen? What is that like? Oh, and when you are there, looking back at the problem from this different point of view, it makes it so much easier to figure out some steps that you could take towards that place, that future version.
Right.
Than if you focus on the problem the whole time. I like to refer that to the GPS system in a car. You can't tell your navigation system, I don't want to stay home. You have to tell it where you want to go.
That is true. Yeah, it's so simple, right? We just get on these head trips of the analysis paralysis. Wow, I love those tips. I love the sensory embodiment piece that you were talking about, and just letting it live in you, and really like the imaginal world of creativity, and just imagining something different and how you want to feel. It's so interesting because I work with women, like you work with women, I work with women, and I have kids too, and I've noticed that when I'm in a place where they're in resistance, and I'm the only way that I can really help establish or hold space for them to get out of that resistance is through exactly what you're talking about, which is, what you don't want. We can start there, but if you really want to open and expand and like get past this wall, really, like we need to use your imagination and creativity. And that you're talking about metaphors. I like to work with archetypes as well, just to kind of, move that through, because we need to access a different part of the brain, right? Isn't that kind of what we're doing, is we're accessing a place that doesn't have as much resistance to develop, when you start to develop a vision or you start to live in your senses, your brain doesn't know that it's not really like your brain doesn't know the difference. It thinks it's really happening. And so you really are creating it. You're creating that state. You talk about, it's almost like you were saying that there's almost like a baseline that you can establish, that you can come back to as your safe creative space, right?
Yeah. And also something about resistance is like, I think many people try to break it. We want to overcome it. You just have to get through this resistance, which is, again, quite a harsh way. And the resistance is there for a reason. It means that some part of you is not aligned with where you want to go. Some part might be in fear, or might have to grieve something, or might just want to be acknowledged or something. And so it's always a good thing to become curious. Oh, there's this resistance there. Wonder what that might want to tell me, or where that, like, maybe not even where that comes from. It maybe doesn't matter where it comes from, but just, what does it want to tell me? Let's have a conversation and see what it needs. To kind of be a little more compassionate with yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I love the just get curious. And that also, like, gratitude, that also opens up, for more expansion. Wow. Well, this has been really enlightening. I love the places we've gone, kind of talking about, I think that, your work is, I think you, like, if I could whittle it down, and I think it's even what you've written here, and what you sent to me, this common experience of powerlessness, because we've been told that the expert on us lies outside ourselves. And this is especially true in women's health for obvious reasons, right? But now we're coming into an era where, like you even talked about, the eroding, that it breaks down the structures naturally. When more and more women are stepping into their bodies and owning their knowledge and experience, it's like, kind of like by osmosis, things are going to start, structures that aren't serving humanity are going to start to disintegrate.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find you online, Lisa? Where's the best place to send our listeners?
Well, the best place is probably my website, where I do offer my weekly soul mail, which is with regards to the cycles. I write weekly with the moon a personal letter to you, where I tell you, okay, this moon phase is coming up now. Beware of these things.
So helpful.
Or this is a good time for a celebration, etc., etc. And also reminding every one of us, myself included, that this is a common human experience. Like, everything is a common human experience. We all go through ups and we all go through downs. And it's okay that we are not the same every day, and don't perform, quote unquote, the same every day. We don't have to perform. It's more important to be true to yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you for that reminder. And even though I'm in menopause, and I know a lot of women who don't have their ovaries or uterus, I know men, like, we're still impacted. Our feminine energy is still impacted by the cyclical process of nature and moons. And so I just wanted to, I know you've already said that, but I just want to remind those of you who might be going, oh, well, I don't know, because I don't menstruate right now. Or that maybe they're pregnant or whatever. Like, we're all influenced. The feminine in us, the yin energy in us, is always being impacted by that. So I love that you send the weekly thing of here's what might be going on for you. That's super helpful. So, well, anyway.
Yeah, I wished I would have had that on my journey. So I thought I create that.
Well, that's just it, right? We see a hole in the continuum and we're like, hey, like me, the book I'm writing right now is the book I wish I could have read like 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I feel you. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been great.
Thank you for having me again. It was such a pleasure.
Lisa didn't mention this in the interview, but wanted me to make sure I let you listeners know that cycle charting is huge. Recording the day of your cycle or the day of the moon, starting with day 1 as either the first day of the bleed or the dark moon, and then just writing 3 words that express how you are on that day and speaking them out, or 3 words that express how you'd like to honor this in your day, no matter what's going on in your life or how full your plate is. And what this does is it teaches you to deeply listen to your body and honor your own needs first. So you can find an example of how to chart your cycle on her website, lisajara.com. I will also have a link to that in the show notes to find her website. But this is a simple, easeful approach that she walks people through, and I love it. I love that we are now like coming into the awareness of how important it is for honoring the dark half of our cycle, both our life cycle, if you're in a dark season, if you're in the shadow side, working through trauma, when you are coming into the underworld or going into the depth, as in the dark moon. It's heavily overlooked. It's underrated. And this has led to a rise in depression, anxiety, burnout. Women's power has been diminished through not going through cyclical periods of rest, regeneration, aligning with our personal cycle, but also being part of the greater cycles of life. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I appreciate you. I see you and honor you, even if I'm not looking at you directly. Have a glorious week, and we'll talk to you next time.